Hello, Frost Middle School. This is Marley your flute instructor. Today I am very excited to be talking about warm-ups with you and some of the things we might think about as we do them. So I am going to be showing a couple of different long tone and scale things that you can think about. It's not super important that you do exactly the same patterns as me, but I'll be talking about various priorities with long tones and with scales that you can either implement in what I'm showing you or the things that you already have that your instructor has shared. So, without further ado, let's start with long tones. The most important thing about long tones, especially as a warm-up, something that we do to get loose, flexible, and playing the instrument the way that we want to sound, is of course going to be emphasizing our air and the resonance of the flute. So I'm going to do a simple chromatic study, and what I'm going to be focusing on is making sure that my embouchure is nice and loose and flexible, and that I'm using a consistent full airstream that I really imagine filling the instrument to its maximum potential, and making what I would consider an unforced, lovely tone. So first I'm going to be starting in the low register because it's the easiest register for me. It's my favorite register to play in, and I feel that I generate my best possible tone there, so I'll start with it. And so on. I think you probably get the idea. The reason that I'm repeating each of these is because in the first time I'm noticing both what was successfully executed and what I can build upon, so that in the second time when I repeat it, I can both do the things that I liked about it once more and see if I can grow upon it, build upon it to make it an even better performance the second time. I'll start that pattern in the low register going down, and then I'll start on that note ascending as well all the way to the highest registers of the flute, up to probably G or A if that's comfortable in the third octave. Another warm-up that I think is very important, being one that generates a great tone, the next is flexibility. So for flexibility, the best thing that we can do is either octaves or harmonics. If you'd like to practice octaves, I recommend that you really consider moving your air through the low note to the high notes to make the transition as smooth as possible, and make sure that you're also moving your embouchure so that you're directing your air a little bit higher and that your embouchure is slightly smaller, your lips being closer together. So. And so forth. So one of the dangers when we play the high register is to tighten our lips so that it's very, very tense, which gets a pinch sound. So we want to make sure that we're still flexible here, still as loose as possible. I'm just shifting my lower lip slightly forward from a relaxed, open position to make sure that we can support the air enough to produce the second octave. As opposed to where you clench, or which you get by simply using your air and not your embouchure. It needs to be a marriage of the two. So, if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, the next topic will be scales. For scales, I like to do them two different ways. One is a way where I continue to think about sound and the connection between my notes and, of course, making the right notes. And then the other is for velocity, for technique. So when I'm using scales, I think that it's important to start by doing them slowly so that you can still think about your tone. Even though it's a technical exercise, it's important to make sure that we're still producing a beautiful flute sound on every note. So a pattern that I really love is a slow major scale, but we're going to add one note, which is the flat seventh. And what I mean by that is a major scale is normally in G major. For this scale, though, I'm going to add an F natural, which is the second to last note of the scale, in addition to the F sharp, so that it sounds like this. The reason will be apparent a second. Here's the study. The reason I added that note was to balance the scale so that it's equal and can be cut in half. And what I'm really focusing on is, of course, the notes, one, and that they're smooth and in time. The next is that I'm making a full, rich, warm sound that really sings through every note, so that if I were to stop on a random note, it would still be the same voluptuous sound that I was making on the long tone exercise. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I decided to stop on that note just to see if my sound was nice, and I love the tone that I'm producing, so then I'll do that one more time. So I would encourage you to do all of your scales this way, slowly making sure that you have a rich sound on every single note. And then once you're comfortable in that area, tempo-wise, then I would start to increase it and work on your finger dexterity. So for this exercise, I would recommend doing a 2-octave scale, extended scales. So what do I mean by extended scales? Extended scales are a wonderful way of getting us unstuck from playing our scales, starting on the same note, arriving at the same note, and returning to the same note every time that we practice them. So it extends the scale so that you actually, you start in a given key, and you play it in several different iterations by the time that you're done. Let me demonstrate. So that would be G major. So the way that I did that scale was that I started on G, I played up the scale as if it was 16th notes, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, except instead of coming down, I went to A as the next note, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, B, C, D, and etc. So that you end up continuing past by one note and then going up. When you're able to do a G major scale like this, you have full control of G major starting and ending in many different ways. And then you would gradually develop the speed until you could do it possibly in one breath like this. The goal being to have a really full breath of air, of course, with a lot of control in different octaves, and also, of course, finger dexterity. So I want to challenge you not just to learn your scales the way that we're mostly taught, which is C major starts on C, goes up to C, comes back to C, but rather to play in the key of C major in many different ways. I'll provide materials for that scale pattern along with some long tones you might consider. Some general things that you might think about both in your long tones and in your scales that would contribute to your growth would be to make sure that you're as focused as possible when you do them. You get much more out of 5 concerted minutes of truly focused practice than you do out of 30 minutes of doing what you're supposed to with your mind wandering, thinking about what you had for lunch and what TV show you're currently into and a million other distractions that we have that flit through our brains when we play. I want to encourage you as much as possible to not necessarily do less, but to do more focused practice in, of course, less time. So that's one thing. The next is that a lot of the time when we're working on a new piece, on scales, on long tones, we tend to focus in on one small detail and at the expense of really being in our own bodies and being in that space. What do I mean by that? I mean, as you do your long tones, I want you to think about your tone and what you're doing with your embouchure and your lips and all the things we think about in order to play the flute. But I also want you, as much as possible, just to remind yourself that you're either standing or sitting, you're holding this instrument, which is not the most natural position in the world, And as much as possible, I want you to feel that you're in the moment of what you're doing and really mindful of the way that your body feels. So if you're experiencing tension somewhere, if you're not experiencing tension somewhere, things like this. So as I'm playing, I'm very attentive to my fingers moving, the way that the flute feels in my hands, the position of my hands, making sure it's as natural a position as possible. And by that I mean the closest to a resting hand position if you were to allow your hand to rest by your side and then come to the flute. I'm thinking about my neck not coming forward to meet the instrument, which is something that we frequently do as flutists, but rather that we're standing in a way that is upright and poised and bringing the flute to us. And also that my feet are flat on the ground, or if you're sitting in a chair, that you're really allowing the chair to support the weight of your body and not your back by it being hunched or some weird, kind of contortion that we do. So if you're really mindful and you do both long tones and scales for 15 minutes a day, I think that you could get a tremendous amount of benefit from them that will transfer over to anything that you play, either solo or ensemble. So thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to share all of this with you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.